Hello, my name is Monash Newman, and I serve as the National Consultant for the International March of the Living. I want to take this opportunity to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined us from all corners of the globe to learn from and with the esteemed Tali Nates, who will be our featured speaker. Not only am I delighted to welcome Tali for all she has to teach us, but also because she is presenting from my birthplace, as evidenced by my accent, Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome, Tali. We are so grateful that you are joining us today. Since its inception in 1988, the International March of the Living has brought over 275,000 students and adults, both Jewish and non-Jewish, from over 40 countries around the globe to Poland on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, and Israel for Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Memorial Day and Israel's Independence Day. The work of the International March of the Living has had a tremendous impact on its participants and has served as a call to action for our thousands of alumni to do their part to fight for a future free of anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, and intolerance in all its forms. While we continue to navigate this new world we all find ourselves in, the International March of the Living remains determined to continue to educate the world about the horrors of the past in order to ensure a better future. And now a little bit about Tali. Tali Nates is the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre and a chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. She is a historian who lectures internationally on Holocaust and genocide issues. She has published many chapters and articles and has won numerous awards for her work. We are so grateful that she has worked with the March of the Living for many years, sharing her knowledge as a historian with the international adult delegations. Tali is a prime example of an upstander, someone who is making the world a much better place. Please put your questions in the Q&A box and we will share with Tali after her presentation to answer them. Thank you once again for joining us, and now to Tali Nates.
Thank you so much, Monique. Thank you to March of the Living for having me. I'm joining you from Johannesburg. Behind me, you see the photo of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and I cannot wait to actually welcome you when we can all travel to South Africa and to Johannesburg. It is especially meaningful for me to speak for March of the Living because I am involved in this program for so many years. Actually, one of the first journeys I took was in the year 2000, and since then was many times in Poland and in Israel. Today, I want to share with you my work in Rwanda, because I work in Rwanda for many years, actually for the past 25 years. And it is work that is extremely important for me. And I would like to share some of the highlights of the encounters I had with survivors, but also with perpetrators and with others that made choices during that time. Of course, on the 7th of April this year, we marked the 27th anniversary since the start of the genocide in Rwanda. And this genocide, I want to emphasize that, was a deliberate, intentional, and systematic mass killing that targeted the Tutsi population of Rwanda. The genocide lasted for about 3 months, about 100 days, from April to July of 1994, and about 1 million were murdered in those 3 months. The majority were Tutsi, but also moderate or politically moderate Hutu and Twa men, women, and children were also murdered in the genocide. This photo that I'm sharing with you is of one of the many killing sites in Rwanda where so many were murdered. I took this picture in 2004, only 10 years after the genocide, and you can see the handwritten note, never again. I add never again with a question mark because never again is again and again and again. And this is a church, a Roman Catholic church of Narama. And I will never forget that time when I visited the church, which is today a memorial site. And this is the resting place of about 4,000 men, women, and children who were murdered inside the church. I was sitting on a church bench outside, and it was opposite the entrance to the church where the bones were, where the remains of people were in those times. Today, it's very different. It is a proper memorial site, but in those times, it was still very, very difficult site, full of human remains, clothes, notebooks, pens, pencils of children. And opposite me was Kokos, our driver. He was a sweet young man with a huge machete scar on his car. And he was visibly upset because that morning we visited the Kigali Genocide Memorial. The Kigali Genocide Memorial is a large museum about the genocide, but it is also the resting place of 250,000 people that are buried there in mass graves around the site, and where Kokos' parents are buried. He survived the genocide. I was sitting with him on the bench. I was holding his hands tight, and I was staying with him because he was clearly in a very dark place of grief. And remember, that was 10 years after the genocide. After a long while, we talked. He even managed a sort of a smile. And holding his hands, I shared with him my story. I shared with him the story of my family, who was murdered in another genocide many years ago. The genocide, I told him, happened in Europe. And my grandmother, my aunts, and many others were murdered in Poland in the Holocaust. They were whites, and they were murdered by white people. And Kokos' eyes opened really wide in disbelief. He held my hands even stronger, and he said, "I'm so sorry." And then he said, "But how come it happened now to me and to my family? How come the world did not remember?" And I did not have a good answer. All I could say is to tell him my story. And this is the story of my father. On the left, Moses or Moshe or Marion Turner. That was one of the lucky ones. He was saved by Oskar Schindler, who, of course, you all know was a German, was a member of the Nazi Party, and saved more than my father and his brother, my uncle Henrik. You see page 10 of the list, and I highlighted the names of my father and my two aunts. The sisters of my father, Hela and Sila, were murdered in the Belgian killing center. And throughout my childhood, I learned from my father that one should not generalize and judge people He always spoke about choices. He always believed that not all Germans were bad. He always believed that people had choices and that Schindler made that choice. And he used to tell me, look at Schindler. He was a German. He was a member of the Nazi party. But because of him, I'm alive. He always said people had choices, always, every day of their lives. And he always said that you cannot decide that because a person is that or she is that, they are so and so. So just to recap, that is my father on the left, my uncle on the right, Moses and Henrik Turner. That is page 10 of Schindler's List. I highlighted the names of my father and my uncle, and you did hear the story of my family. So let's go into the story of choices. In April of 1994, countries also made choices. You know, in South Africa, we stood out in lines for hours to vote in our first democratic elections. We started to stand up in the morning. We only voted 10 o'clock that night. And I joined millions of South Africans in celebrating our country's first democratic elections and freedom from apartheid, voting for Nelson Mandela to be our first president. But of course, meanwhile, same month, same year, 3.5 hours away from us in Rwanda, already hundreds of thousands of Tutsi had already been murdered in Rwanda. Now, what is the most shocking for me is that although I am a second generation Holocaust survivor, I could not make the connection in real time at that time between my personal history of genocide and the events unfolding in front of my eyes in Rwanda. Only months later, years later, I could make that connection. So it is clear that we not only need to learn from history, but we also need to urgently make faster links between the past and the present. We need to transform history into lessons for humanity that are relevant to our societies today. Wherever you are joining us today, there are lessons that we can learn about. So the history of Rwanda and the inspiring and haunting stories of individuals, of communities, and of governments during the genocide can teach us so much about moral choices and also about their consequences. And what I'm going to share with you today is really choices of mainly survivors, but people that were saved by upstanders, by resistors, by rescuers. I will also share with you stories of perpetrators and stories of bystanders. And all those stories are part of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre exhibition. So in a way, I'm inviting you into the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre that actually officially only opened in March of 2019. And I'm very proud to be part of the team that founded the center, and I'm today its director. So in our center, we look at other genocides, starting with the 1904 genocide of the Herero and Nama people in today's Namibia, what used to be Southwest Africa. We look at Armenia and the genocide of the Christian Armenians in 1915. We look at the story of Raphael Lemkin and his coining of the word genocide in 1944 and how he worked to initiate and implement the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. But of course, our two main case studies are the Holocaust and the genocide in Rwanda that targeted the Tutsi population. Throughout the exhibition, we present history through the voices of witnesses and through their choices, victims, survivors, perpetrators, resistors, rescuers, bystanders, and others. We look at their dilemmas and at their choices. Tutsi survivors, most of them children at the time of the genocide, are carrying immense trauma. And it's very difficult for them to speak. The other day, a survivor that spoke to a class actually came back to us and said, I cannot do it for a while. Please just let me have a rest because I have nightmares and I cannot speak about it at the moment. And COVID and the pandemic did not help. It's actually really, really difficult at the moment for many of those survivors. It brings them back to the trauma. So we interviewed for the exhibition and for the education program survivors only 20 years after that genocide. In Holocaust equivalent, think about survivors being interviewed really in 1965. And this is really what happened because survivors started to speak only after the Eichmann trial many times in the 1960s. So we see the same phenomena also in the testimonies of the Rwandans. And I want to share with you some of those stories of those survivors that settled in Johannesburg. They are from Rwanda. They maybe work here or they study here, and some of those stories. And the first story that I'll tell you is about neighbors helping in a time of great need. And let's look together at the courage and innovation that was needed to save a life, and of course, to stay alive. And the first story is of a wonderful, wonderful man, Emmanuel, that was only 8 years old during the genocide. Emmanuel's father was killed when the civil war started in Rwanda. A civil war started in 1990, where the Tutsi army in Uganda, in what is today the DRC, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, tried to come back to Rwanda and to demand to bring Tutsis back to Rwanda. The history of Rwanda is very complicated, but there was an exile from Rwanda and massacres in Rwanda when they became independent from Belgium. And in 1959, many were deported or were chased out of Rwanda. And in 1990, a civil war started when there was a demand to bring back the families that were in exile back to Rwanda. Emmanuel's father was killed when that happened in 1990. He was actually targeted for being an outspoken community leader. And he was taken, and the family never seen him again. And then they heard that he was murdered by the Hutu extremists in his village. During the genocide, his mother and 13 out of his 14 siblings, brothers and sisters, survived. And that was thanks to the Hutu neighbor and his family. The mother of the Hutu neighbor helped, the sister helped, they hid the whole family. But sadly, his one sister that did not live in that village and her unborn child, who was pregnant at the time, were tragically murdered. Emmanuel is now married. He has a beautiful baby girl, and this is part of his testimony. And he said, I was saved by a Hutu. That's my life. And if there are people who say, no, maybe he did help you, but he wanted to kill other people, that's not up to me to judge. If that guy was not there at that time, at the time he came, right now, I will be in some memorial. I would like to share with you a few minutes of Emmanuel's testimony. Let's listen to it together.
Me, my brother Bernard, and Jeff, we went down to the lake because we said we shouldn't hide in the same place. Because maybe if they find one, they might kill one. and the others will survive. But now the problem, there were lepers in that wreck. We saw like 40 of them. So we decided to go on top of a tree. Down they went into the lake. So now we could see where they were swimming, their destination. Now it's 7 o'clock, the sun is out, which means the killers are out also, because in the morning that's when you could hear the screaming, the chasing, the dogs. I had a friend, we didn't even know he was hiding not far from there. So we saw him, they found him, dogs. That boy was not really a good swimmer, so he jumped into the water, he tried to swim, but they came, they had guns, they shot him. He was in my class, I remember him. That day, that's when I was like, okay, this is real. Because that was the first time I saw someone being just killed in front of me. But couldn't, nothing, could just keep quiet. Pray that they don't find you.
Very, very difficult testimony. All these films are part of our permanent exhibition at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. We created 24 such films, and we had the talented director Adam Mazzo from Boston, actually, from the United States, creating these films in Rwanda and in South Africa. Emmanuel, as I said, survived thanks to his Hutu neighbor. Now, let's look at survival thanks to the help of strangers. And this time, it is the story of Sylvester Stallion. He actually lives in South Africa. He came to South Africa for medical treatment because he suffered severe injuries, severe wounds sustained in the genocide. So he stayed here and he volunteers at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. His parents and siblings were murdered in the genocide. He survived only with 2 of his brothers. Sylvester's life was saved by a German sister, Milgita Kossa. And he said, there was a German nun at the church, Milgita Kossa. Not many of them stayed, but she did. She wanted to help us. And Sylvester tells the story of how the militia, the Hutu militia, the extremists, came into the church where his family was hiding. And they tried to resist, but to no avail. And most of them were murdered. I would like to share with you Sylvester's testimony.
Rwandans people used to believe that in the church, no one should attack a church. And whoever was there had to be safe. Attacking church is like attacking God. In the morning we hear bomb, boom, boom, everywhere. So now we've been attacked. What was the difference? There were cows. The cow is in front of you, and then you throw stone. It comes to a time whereby the cows run away. Now is a war face to face. So they hit me at the back, everywhere, and here. But then let me tell you that the memory when you know that you're going to die, I think there's no pains. My soul was gone, my spirit was gone. What was there was just a body. I never feel anything, but I remember when they hit me here, I told myself, you know what, if they hit me again, I'm gone. But the fact that too much blood was out, they were just seeing blood only. They thought, oh, we're done with this one. Yeah, it's dead. The morning they're coming to bury us, or they're coming to check whoever's still alive. I ran away. This Catholic sister, the one who was from Germany, was having a medical center. He used to keep on bribing people always that they must not kill us.
Again, his story is very, very moving. But Sylvester built a family. He has a beautiful wife. He has a young, growing family of 4 children. And as I said, he gives back by telling his story. Some of the choices are really painful. Agnes' story is one such painful story. She is a Hutu woman who married a Tutsi man, but according to the tradition, even though she is Hutu, her children are regarded as Tutsi as it goes according to the father. During the genocide, her husband and 3 of her 6 children were murdered. Agnes herself was raped. Alexander, who destroyed her house and was part of the gang that killed her family, confessed to her. And after coming out of jail, he helped her to rebuild her house that the gang of militia destroyed. She says, I have to be strong so that I may forgive, so that I may continue living. The strength allows me to take care of orphans, because now we are the women and the men of our families. We are parents of diverse families, parents of Rwandan families. And her choice is to come together as one nation, Hutu, Tutsi, survivors, and those that serve time, and actually build the country together. And it's important to look at stories of rescuers and stories of people that are building the country as well, because 27 years later, the country is doing very well. And I will share with you some of those stories in a minute. I would like to share with you really inspirational stories. And this is a story of rescue, but also an encounter with the perpetrator. This is the story of Carl Wilkins and his encounter in Johannesburg through our exhibition with the perpetrator that he encountered 26 years before in Rwanda. Carl Wilkins was the director of the Rwandan Adventist Development and Relief Agency International of the 7 Days Adventist Church. He was the only American who chose to stay in Rwanda during the genocide. By the way, all the foreigners left, and his family, his own family, his wife, his children, his parents, he convinced them to get evacuated. And then Carl helped the head of the orphanage, one of the orphanages in Kigali, the Gisimba, that was a Hutu man. He was the director of the orphanage in Kigali, as I said, to provide safe haven for 400 children and their parents and to save their lives. When militias prepared to attack the orphanage, Wilkins pleaded with the Rwandan prime minister. He actually went to the prime minister at the time, Kambanda, and he pleaded with them to save their orphans there. And actually he managed. When he went and he said, Prime Minister, you must help me, the Prime Minister said, fine, we will let them get out of the orphanage and get to a safe place. So thanks to Wilkins and Gisimba's intervention, all 400 orphans and adults hiding were evacuated to a safer place in Kigali and survived. And he says, I was there trying to stop the militia from entering. They asked the children to split to two groups, Hutu on one side and Tutsi on the other. But the children, as I always told them, they were one. They should be united. They did not want to separate. And the children actually did not separate. They said to Gisimba, we will stay, we will not separate. And like that, the militia will not know who is Hutu and Tutsi, and they will not kill us. Now, in 2019, in October, just before the pandemic, Carl came to Johannesburg. We work a lot together. And he gave a talk to a group of students around the permanent exhibition. And as he was walking around, he suddenly saw a picture of this man, Gregoire, who was a perpetrator that was the head of the militia in the orphanage. And he's serving a life sentence in Rwanda. And Carl became very emotional. And then he shared with us how he is struggling to come to terms with Gregoire's choices and how he's still striving to learn to see him fully as a human being, like himself. It's very, very moving because how do I see Gregoire beyond that box that I spoke about in the beginning? Let's listen to Gregoire giving his testimony to us about being a perpetrator in Rwanda.
Wenda umuntu ashyiraho urwo ruhare rwa guverinoma, ariko guverinoma ntago ariba mu mutima w'umuntu. Nari umwe mu bayobozi b'urwego rw'ibanze mu mujyi wa Kigali, nyobora segiteri Nyakabanda. Nkaba rero nashishikarije abanyarwanda kwica abatutsi mu gihe cya Genocide muri 1994. 12 nteganya ko nk'ibihumbi 8 cyangwa 9 baguye muri iyo segiteri. Ntabwo nigize ngira uruhare mu kwica, ariko mu gushishikariza abantu mu gutegura iyo gahunda yo kwica, ndumva ari ngiye waba uri kwisonga, kuko iyo nza kumera nk'ubirwanya ndumva nta kiba cyarabaye.
Mbere zaraje ndumva atari ibanga.
Ubundi hariho gahunda yo kuvuga ko umututsi agiye kutwambura ubutegetsi twebwe abahutu. Biba ngombwa rero ko habaho ko na leta kuko imera nk'idushyigikira, kuko nta wigeze ahanirwa icyo kintu. Cyane cyane ko ibyo bintu bikoze nabitekereje nabigambiriye, ubwo rero n'igihano ngomba kucyakira. Kuko wari uyoboye guverinoma, tuvuge ko yaratuye mu Kiyovu, njye nari ntuye mu Nyakabanda. Ese yaraje ampereza imbunda, ampereza umupanga, ampereza iki cya gutema wa mukecuru duturanye? Icyaha ni gatozi ku muntu.
Very difficult to generalize, as you can see. Some of the perpetrators that we interviewed blame the government. Others blame the elders. Others say, I just followed orders, very similar to the Holocaust. But let's look at the world, because where were we during the genocide? Where were we in South Africa? Where were we in the United States or Europe? And the world played really the role of bystanders during the genocide. From the United Nations that did not get involved, to the church, the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, to the synagogue, to countries like the US or Belgium that used to be the colonial power, or Germany that used to be the colonial power there, to South Africa or countries in Africa. None of us got involved. Philippe Galliard, who did stay behind, that was the head of the Red Cross in Rwanda at that time, said everybody knew, every day, live, what was happening. Who moved? Nobody. And actually, Samantha Power, in her very powerful book describing genocide, is talking about a senator in Colorado that tried to get her, Colorado to speak up about what is happening in Rwanda in April, May, June 1994. And Senator Schroeder. And she said, sadly, no one cared about the people. They cared about the mountain gorillas, and they were very concerned what will happen to the silverback and the mountain gorillas. But the people, they did not care. And then the question is, how do we, as the international community, deal with the story? I'm going to show you a short film produced by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum that will tell you more about the genocide for those of you that don't know this complex story of the genocide, but also tells you about the international community's reaction. And this is an interview with General Romeo Delay, that was the head of the UN mission to Rwanda at that time.
Canadian General Romeo Dallaire witnessed the genocide as commander of a small UN peacekeeping force stationed in Rwanda. In June 2002, he spoke at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum about how the genocide might have been prevented and about his own struggle with the memory of failing to do so.
You can't just say, well, it's 8 years ago or 9 years ago and you did what you could. Did I do everything I could? Did I have all the tools?
In the middle of this horror were General Dallaire and the poorly equipped UN force sent to keep a peace that the extremists had suddenly, violently shattered.
You have no food, water, fuel, medical supplies, defensive stores, because none of the contracts had been signed 6 months into the mission by the UN staff. Countries had not provided troops with equipment, so you got Bangladeshi troops coming in with not even a pot to be able to cook their food.
3 months before the genocide began, General Dallaire had learned of extremist plans for mass murder and told his UN superiors that he was going to seize an arms cache.
The response was immediate, within hours, that I was not authorized, it was outside my mandate, and that I was jeopardizing the whole mission. Well, on the 6th of April, the war started. Within 24 hours, I had 10 soldiers dead, but already thousands of Rwandans were being slaughtered.
After the killing started, General Dallaire requested more forces to stop the murders.
Within the first few days of the Rwandan war and genocide, Kofi Annan went to all 69 countries. Not one of them provided one soldier.
Although no nation would send troops to help the Rwandans, Western soldiers did arrive to evacuate Westerners.
And so all the expatriates, within 5 days, picked up what they had, left the Rwandans who had served them for years, decades, who raised their kids, left them to be slaughtered behind, and went back to Brussels and Paris and all these other places.
The world turned its back on Rwanda. 2 weeks into the genocide, the UN Security Council voted to reduce Dallaire's force to a token level. General Dallaire left Rwanda in August 1994. He still struggles with the memory of what he witnessed.
You just can't walk through all that blood and all that gore and all that sound. Did I or should I have walked up to Kofi Annan or Boutros Ghali and throw my commission in front of him and say, to hell with you, nobody's coming, so I'm going? Should I have commenced opening fire? The first morning, it was made very clear to me that if I opened fire, I would become the third belligerent, because then it's open season. But with the force I had, there was no way that I could open fire and guarantee the security of my force. I didn't have enough ammunition to be able to hold out in a firefight for more than half an hour. No, there is no conceivable way of actually being able to walk away from the immensity of what it is. This is not 4 or 5 people on a block. This is thousands upon weeks and weeks and weeks. And the Western world sat there. You got to start wondering about the depth of your belief in the moral values, the ethical values, and your belief in humanity. All humans are human. There are no humans more human than others. That's it.
Really, really difficult, but important. All humans are human. There's no human that is more human than another. Really, really important words that we should all carry with us. So how does Rwanda heal after such catastrophe? There is no time for me to go through everything, but of course they had to seek justice in many ways. They had to build memorials. They had to bury the dead. They had to rebuild education. They had to rebuild infrastructure, houses, roads. And they had to learn how to live together. And Fatuma, the executive secretary, the former executive secretary of the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission until 2009, when we interviewed her, said really important words. She said, our policy is unity and reconciliation, accommodating everybody, including the perpetrators. Killers have to live side by side with victims after the 1994 genocide. We cannot have a land for victims and a land for perpetrators. Despite whatever happened, they have to live side by side. And it is difficult. Many were in jail. About 200,000 perpetrators were in jail, and they had to find a solution of how to work with the justice system and how to rebuild Rwanda. And today, 27 years after the genocide, Rwanda is a beautiful, safe country. And I really urge you all to visit. It is very small. You can visit for a week. You can see the beauty of the place, the mountains, yes, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, but also the history through museums and art galleries and shopping centers and so on. So how do the country rebuild? And one of the most important things is to tell the story, to collect testimonies. And Antoinette, that lost all her family in the genocide, is reflecting and saying these very powerful words. I need to find the strength to tell my story. If I don't, it is like denying the genocide. If I, the only survivor of my family, die without telling my history, it will die with me. The name of our family will disappear forever. I want my child to learn about our history. I don't want it to be hidden. And this is the task now of these young survivors. When do you tell? When are the children ready to hear my story? Do I give testimonies? Do I share my painful story? Do I share it for future generations? And learning about genocide is important. Our role, you the listener, me, the educator, us in the museum world, us in March of the Living, our society need to pay attention and listen to the stories and the warnings of survivors that we meet. We all know from Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel that said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. And we do need to listen to the survivors from Rwanda as well, because learning about genocide and how it relates to contemporary human rights issues can help us see how prejudice, discrimination, and othering can lead to mass atrocities, to genocide, and to human rights abuse. By emphasizing the importance of empathy, critical thinking, and personal responsibility, we can become active voices against hate speech, against human rights violations, and we need to work together towards preventing future genocides. Our exhibition ends with these two survivors. We have photos of two amazing survivors that are volunteering at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centres and sharing their story with classes and with groups. Irene Klaas is a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto. She participated in the March of the Living. She was from Lodz. She was saved also by Righteous Amongst the Nations. And she said, I thought that when the world learned what had happened to us, it could never happen again, but it did. Sylvester, who you met before, said, and a genocide happened yet again to us here in Rwanda, in full view of the world. So the words never again that we started with was definitely not their reality. So the question is, can we be activists for change? Can we use memory for activism to end genocide in our lifetime? And I'd like to end with the words in Hebrew, Zachor, remember, Kumbula in Zulu, and Ibuka in Kinyarwanda, the language of Rwanda, to say it has to start with memory. So thank you very much for listening. And Liz, it is back to you.
Thank you so much for opening up our eyes to this new topic. And I thank you, and I thank all the members of our audience for putting up with the connection issues. It just shows that we are all united in our mercy to internet and electricity. So thank you everybody in Tali as well. I just wanted to start the question just by asking, where can people learn more about the Rwandan genocide and the history and the aftermath? I think not many people are as educated on the topic as they'd like to be.
So thank you so much. My colleague Daniela from the Holocaust and Genocide Centre is just posting many links in the chat. So please be free to go to the chat and copy these links. We published a wonderful short book of testimonies of genocide survivors, Tutsi genocide survivors that settled in South Africa, and they tell you more about the genocide. We also have many films, short films, like the ones that I showed you on our website and YouTube channel. And please feel free to go into the website, YouTube channel, SoundCloud, to listen to podcasts and testimonies. Also, you can learn a lot from the website of the Kigali Genocide Memorial. This memorial does fantastic work. We do a lot of work together with them, and they have a huge archive as well. So you can learn from that about artifacts, about stories in different churches, and different choices of individuals and communities. Lastly, Eyewitness, the USC Shoah Foundation, included in their collection, you know, Shoah Foundation, the Spielberg Archive collected 52,000 or so survivors' testimony from the Holocaust, but now they are increasing the archive by also including testimonies from Rwanda and from other genocides as well. So please go to the USC Shoah Foundation and you can learn there as well.
Thank you. I'd like to read some of the questions that have come in. So Michael Kaplan asks, are there now mechanisms in place to trigger international intervention in the case of another genocide? You know, in your first opening slide, we saw never again, and that's so familiar to so many of us who know the history of the Holocaust, and we sort of see it again and again and again. So have we learned any lessons in that regard?
Yeah, so it's such a good question because, of course, after the Holocaust, sadly, we saw many genocides. So we saw not only Rwanda, but we saw Cambodia in 1975, and we saw the events in Srebrenica in Bosnia, in that war in 1995, and then even in the 21st century, we are witnessing events in Myanmar of the Rohingya genocide, the Yazidi in Iraq, northern Iraq, and so on. So it actually can be quite depressing when you think never again with a question mark or never again, again and again. But let's concentrate a little bit with the mechanisms that were put in place. And we are not in the same boat as in 1945 or let's say in 1939 when events happened in Europe. First of all, in 1945, the United Nations was born. It's not perfect, 100% it's not perfect, but in December of 1948, the Convention Against the Crime of Genocide, you know, the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide was passed. There is a word genocide. There was not word to describe the crime until 1944. Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer, invented the word. It's Latin and Greek, genocide, genocide, the murder of a people. There was no word to describe it. So this in itself is really, really important. And then, of course, there are many conventions, many laws, international laws. For example, in 2005, the responsibility to protect convention was adopted, and nations supposed to protect nations in need. And this helped in many cases in Africa, for example. It was enacted in Kenya. There was almost a civil war in Kenya around the elections, and through interventions that worked. Or in the Gambia, the overthrowing of a dictator there a few years ago, where the nations in the area intervened and stopped it. So there are good stories as well, not enough, as we know. So we have to do more. We have to get involved more. And for me, we are in a better situation, but we do have a long way to go. There is no doubt about that. Now, it's interesting because Rwanda now is sending peacekeepers, by the way. I just want to add. So we spoke about the UN and the failure of the peacekeepers through Romeo Delay and his testimony. And now in Mozambique, in northern Mozambique, where there is Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab attack of a civilian population, not only South Africa is sending peacekeepers, Rwanda now is sending peacekeepers that are really helping to stabilize the situation and to push the extremists from that area. So, you know, a full circle 27 years later.
It's heartwarming to hear that, you know, things can change and do a 180. And Monique asks, how much did racism play in the world's ignoring of the genocide? Can you speak about that?
And I think this is such an important question, Monique, because you ask yourself why, you know, the world did not intervene. And it's not a simple answer, of course. You know, Rwanda is a poor country, doesn't have many minerals or many richness, but The DRC is a rich country that has many minerals, and we need the minerals for our cell phones, and still the world is not intervening, and millions were killed. So it's complicated answer, but it is a question that we all have to ask. We actually must ask that question. And Romeo Dallaire film that I think is a very powerful film, when we show that to learners, to students, I think that you all noticed the dog that was saved, you know, in that bag, and the fact that the troops came to save the whites, the ex-colonial powers, you know, the Americans and the French and the Belgium and the Germans. And I know many that were saved, actually, many that were diplomats or worked with NGOs or foundations that were taken out. But they could not take with them the Tutsi that worked with them. I have a colleague that worked in a German foundation in Kigali. He managed to be taken out to Burundi, but they searched the car and he could not take his Tutsi stuff with. And these are some of the questions. Is it racism? Is it that the focus is on Europe, but not on Africa? Is it because our capacity is to, to just handle one crisis at a time? Just a few months before that, there was the crisis in Somalia, Black Hawk Down, the downing of the US troops and the killing of the US troops. That just happened. And can we not manage, crises that are coming in quick succession? So there are many things that comes to mind. But of course, what we do have to remember is that African countries also did not get involved. And the UN was led by Africans at the time. The head of the United Nations was Boutros Ghali from Egypt, and the head of the peacekeeping forces that later became the head of the UN was Kofi Annan from Ghana. So we can't actually say, that Africa did, but the rest of the world didn't. Africa also did not get involved. And finally, just to answer, after the convention that was passed in 1948 in the United Nations, the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment for the Crime of Genocide, you have to get involved, actually, when genocide happens, but you have to call it genocide. So the United Nations in 1994 decided not to call it genocide. They just called it civil war. And the minute you call it civil war, you do not need to get involved. And the calling of it, the naming of it as genocide happened only in the end of June, beginning of July, when the genocide actually was stopped by the Rwandan Patriotic Front Army that came in from Uganda and the DRC and basically stopped the genocide.
As a follow-up to what you were just speaking about, Jerry asks, why is the attention on the failure to act against genocide always directed at the West? Why is it never directed at Asian countries? And you spoke briefly about the African countries, but can you speak on that?
No. There are lots of expectations, and I think it's a fair question. It's really a fair question. There are a lot of expectations from the West, but also from the ex-colonial powers. So don't forget that Africa was colonized until the 1960s. Let me give you the case of Rwanda. Rwanda in 1884, during the Berlin Conference, was given to Germany. Germany was the first colonial power. They lost control during the First World War, as they lost control, for example, in Namibia, also in 1916, 1918, and Belgium took over through the League of Nations that existed between the two wars. And Belgium was there until 1961, 1962. So you have a lot of influence in Africa by the West, especially by France, Belgium, Portugal, England, the United Kingdom, and Africa in a way is Francophone and Anglophone, depends where colonial powers came from France, for example, in West Africa, but also, as I said, Germany, Belgium, England, like in Kenya, or in other countries in North Africa and West Africa.
Thank you. Before I go on to the next question, I just wanted to note to the audience some of the descriptions that you had said about when the Western and European and Americans would take their citizens out, how that imagery is very familiar to what we've just seen in Afghanistan. And I think everyone should just internalize that for a moment. What happened? Can you speak a little bit about some of the justice that the survivors were able to obtain after the end of the genocide?
I think that is really an important question, because what do you do when it's a country of 13 million today, okay? It was smaller, slightly smaller before the genocide, because people came back from the neighboring countries, people that were in exile before. 1 million die or are killed. 200,000 or so are in jail. How do you come to justice? And they looked at many models after the genocide. They looked at the Nuremberg laws model, so a model of trials, and to put 200,000 people on trial would have taken them more than 100 years. So that was out of, couldn't happen. The international community, through the United Nations, decided to implement the Nuremberg trial model in what we call the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the ICTR, and that's set in Arusha from 1994 until 2004, more or less, 2004, yes, 2004, and then there were some cases until 2014. And they tried and found guilty only the masterminds. So it's the top, those that had the power. It's not the foot soldiers, it's not the militias. So 75 of them were found guilty, and they sat in prison in different countries in Africa. There were also some national trials in Europe, in Canada, in other countries, also in Rwanda. But majority of the cases were tried in, not really tried, were processed, because they looked a lot at South Africa. After apartheid, South Africa went through the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So there were hearings, community hearings, to look at the crimes. And you could have asked for amnesty, or it could have gone to trial and you could go to jail. And they thought this is not good enough because this is genocide and you cannot just give amnesty, but they decided to adopt some of it, and they created a grassroots system called the gacaca. The gacaca is a Kenya-Rwanda word that describing the soft grass. It is a traditional way of judging in the community, where you appoint community leaders as the judges. So the gacaca trials were local community tribunals or trials. There were 5 justices appointed from the community, voted for by the community. So there were no lawyers, there were no judges, real judges, but there were, of course, processes that they had to follow. And the whole community came, they brought the perpetrator. And for example, Alexander, the one that rebuilt Agnes's house, let's take him as an example. He came in front of the gacaca. He confessed to everything he did. Other perpetrators did not come forward. He actually told on them. He gave the names of those perpetrators, and he cooperated fully with the gacaca. And part of his punishment, he served very little time in jail, was to actually go back to the community, rebuild the house, rebuild the community, and actually serve the community. So in a way, it was a restorative justice way. It was punitive, but also restorative. And in that way, they tried almost 2 million cases, because many perpetrators did more than one crime. They maybe killed the cows, they slaughtered the cows, they raped, they killed, they burned the house and so on. So there were multiple crimes that people were brought up to. So complicated, but it seemed to have worked. I had the opportunity to attend a few times Gacaca. It was very, very interesting. And I had a translator to translate for me because it is all in Kinyarwanda. I also attended a meeting of the Unity and Reconciliation Commission in a village. And that meeting was fascinating because there were families of victims, so survivors. There were wives of perpetrators that were still in jail. And there were perpetrators that got amnesty and were released from jail. They all sat in a circle. They shared their stories and testimonies. And they rebuilt their village together. So they built their houses. They helped each other in the fields. It was a very rural village, very agricultural village, because many of the men were murdered and the survivor women could not tend to the fields themselves. And those perpetrators were the ones that are actually tending to the field. So it's a very restorative system. Because after the Holocaust, the survivors mainly did not live side by side with the perpetrators. But in Rwanda, they don't have a choice. So they had to find a way of living together.
Yes, thank you. I regret we have so many questions, but I do believe that we're going to wrap it up with one final one. And I'm sure anybody who didn't get their questions answered can look to the center and for answers, and also can email us and we can try to direct those questions to Tali and get you some answers. And those who are asking for the links to the videos that we showed in the presentation, I'm sure we can share those as well. So to sum it up as our last question, I'm going to combine a question we got from Sherry as well as one of my own. So what are the top 3 ways in which we can take effect and take action to prevent genocide and to intervene when genocide is occurring? And furthermore, what can we do? And again, this question came from Moniz as well, who opened the webinar. What can we do to try to inspire the next generation to become upstanders for the future?
I think this is the key question, really. And it's great because this is March of the Living. And, it's an action-orientated organization. Certainly our museum is the same, but many other museums all around the world are the same. So we don't only look at the history, we enact activism. So it's always about what can I do? So it's not only listening to survivors. I think this is the first step for me, is learn about the history. Don't only narrow yourself to one history. Perhaps say, you know what, I don't know much about Armenia. Maybe I should try and read maybe an article or listen to a short video about it, just to know a little bit more about that. Or I know that things are happening in Myanmar now. There was a coup in February. What is happening now? And try to enlighten yourself. So try to learn. And I'm really grateful to the March of the Living for actually doing this webinar about Rwanda, because I could have spoken about the Holocaust. There's no problem. I'm actually a historian of the Holocaust in Rwanda. So I could have spoken about that. But I'm so grateful that you came to listen to a webinar about Rwanda and learn about that, because now you know more. So you will recognize the warning sign. This is number 2, recognize the warning sign. Gregory Stanton, an eminent scholar of genocide, recognized 10 stages of genocide. By the way, the last stage is denial, like there is Holocaust denial, there's also denial of the genocide in Rwanda, in Armenia, in Cambodia, and so on. So learn about those 10 stages. And many times when you see the early stages, you read about it, you look at what is happening in your own society, in the United States, in Canada, in South Africa. If you see certain stages happening, if it is othering, if it is propaganda, if it is discrimination, even if it is dehumanization, try and get involved in NGOs. Try, if you are a student, write a letter I'm worried about what is happening now to your senator, to your mayor, to, to a synagogue, to a church. Get involved. Raise your voice. Don't be a bystander. Don't keep it all to yourself. Terrible. What I'm saying is terrible. Write something, say something, volunteer somewhere. And I hope that together we will continue to tell you more good stories like the one in Kenya, the one in Ivory Coast, and many other good stories where genocide was stopped.
Thank you, Tali. And thank you so much for this incredibly fascinating lecture. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say thank you for sharing your knowledge and opening our eyes to, for many of us, is a new topic for us. Please stay tuned for more information regarding March of the Living's upcoming programming. Our programming for Kristallnacht will begin on November 1st. Our next webinar, Exploring the Narrative of Holocaust and Genocide Education in the Public Arena with Daphna Michelson-Janae, the Colorado House of Representatives, will take place on Tuesday, November 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. To hear about other further educational webinars offered by the March of the Living, please visit our website, motl.org, and follow us on our various social media platforms. We look forward to greeting all of you at our next event and in person, please God, on the March of the Living 2022. Stay safe and shalom.